This is Brian from Kentucky, and you are listening to Scandal Water,
where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
and Ashley,
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, Ashley.
good morning.
This is such an exciting episode.
Yeah.
We are starting season 4.
I can't believe it.
First reason why this episode is so special, but there's a second reason why this
Yes.
episode is so special. It's because our listeners
Yes.
had a say in choosing this.
They did.
I think you guys have heard us talk before about a group we have on Facebook. It's called Armchairs and Tea. And it's a little more personal, a little more informal than our
Casual.
normal, than our normal Scandal Water page. We decided a couple months ago, I believe it was, to put out a poll and ask our members of that group what they'd be interested in hearing us talk about in season 4. We gave them some different topics they were allowed to choose, and they chose a couple different themes they really liked, this being the one that won. We are starting season 4 with Breaking Up is Hard to Do.
Yes, it is.
Thanks to our listeners. And by the way, if you want to be part of that group, we'd love to have you join. It's a fun little community. Just go on over to Facebook and ask to be added to our group, and we'd love to
Just
have you.
tell us how you heard of us. That's all you got to do. That's the
right.
only bar to entry.
But when we think about breaking up is hard to do and starting off a new season with a bang, I mean,
Who else are you gonna
right?
pick?
I mean,
else are
who
you
better than beautiful, talented, legendary, yet sassy and somewhat notorious
Yes.
Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes.
This is going to
Yes.
be so fun.
I know.
So fun. And again, starting us off with a bang, I thought I would begin with a little clip.
Oh.
This is from a 1980 interview with Dick Cavett. The speaker is Richard Burton.
Oh boy.
People are out there wondering if I'm ever going to have the guts to mention the name Elizabeth Taylor in your presence. And I don't know that I am.
He just did.
Partly because your more than lovely wife was backstage. But I would like to know one thing, and this interests me and may be far too technical for people's tastes, but she is said to have a genius for screen acting. And I had seen references of your having learned from her or her.
Oh, yes. I think she's, I know she'll forgive me for saying so, but she is indeed a woman of infinite variety. But I've talked about her so much in the last 20 years, perhaps, that even she is getting tired of what I say about her. Anyway, I like her very much, and she likes me, and I think she's one of the most underrated screen actresses that ever lived, and I think she's one of the best ones who ever lived. At her very finest, she is incomparable.
Among actors, she's highly thought of, but...
Well, for the press, I think, are deceived by her great beauty, and they can't believe there's somebody as pretty or as beautiful as that can actually act as well.
Sure.
But there's no question about that she is a superb screen actress. And I think that in later years, I mean, can you remember Bogart ever having a good notice during his lifetime, except for, shall we say, The African Queen or something like that, where he played something outside himself, slightly outside himself. I think that Elizabeth will become a cult figure one of these days, and that her films will be run endlessly on television as bogies are now. And people will realize that perhaps she was before her time as an actress. And if you don't mind, I won't say anything more about Elizabeth Taylor.
That's quite all right with me.
I was wondering if he was going to tell this story.
I
I'm not going to get it right because it's, in the cobwebs of my mind, but he was talking about when he first met her on the set of Cleopatra and when they were first acting together, that he thought she wasn't doing anything. He said she was just standing there and there was nothing happening. Meanwhile, I'm over here acting my heart out and doing all of this stuff. And then he sees the Daily Rushes and he realizes that he's like, my words, this buffoon that's just overacting. And then she just glances and and looks, and you could
Just
see this
embodied the role.
emotion from her. And he just was like, in that moment, I realized she is marvelous at acting, because stage acting, which is what he had done, versus film acting is much different. You know, the
Right.
stage acting, you tend to overact because you want the back row to see your emotions. And with film, if you can think it, the audience can usually see it.
Right. Yeah. No, I didn't actually see that clip, but that's a really great.
I don't know if it was a clip, but it's been a story I've read.
Right. Yeah, I love that. But I also love this one because, first of all, you heard him say, "My wife is backstage."
Yeah, so they were married at the time.
No.
Oh, no?
That's
the different wife.
That's a different wife. So his current wife is backstage, and he is being asked about Elizabeth Taylor.
When he first said it, I thought, well, that sounds like a post-divorce question. But then when he said my wife, I thought, well, maybe that is Elizabeth that's back there. So it was not.
It was not. But what a nice setup, I thought, for this particular episode. Because on the one hand, we are focusing in primarily on Elizabeth Taylor's relationships and breakups, because that's the theme of the month, right? Breaking up is hard to do.
Yep.
And Richard Burton was obviously a key, if not the one and only major love of her life. But I also felt like it would do a disservice to her if we did not hit on her talent. I mean, she is a legendary actress.
Absolutely.
And so I love that this was the man that she just adored speaking about her incredible talent and saying that someday he thought she would have basically a cult following.
I know. Yeah. Which she kind of does, I guess. Yeah.
She does. What is your background with Elizabeth Taylor, Ashley, before we move on into this?
I've seen quite a few of her movies. I know a little bit about her life. I've listened to The History Chicks many years ago. Whenever they released it, they did a 3-part biography on her because her life
There's a lot.
There was a lot to encompass. I know a lot of a little bit, if that makes sense, about her life.
My family did not watch the classics as I was growing up. I'm embarrassed to admit, I'm not sure that I've seen an Elizabeth Taylor movie in its entirety ever. But I thought it was interesting. Actually, I thought it would make it more interesting that you would come from your perspective where you would have that background with her as this legendary screen actress. Whereas I think she came across my consciousness as almost this notorious figure.
Yeah,
when I think of
more
her,
pop culture.
Yes, I think of her. I think it was in perfume commercials. She had her perfume line.
Yeah.
She had a jewelry line.
Yeah.
She was hanging out with Michael Jackson.
Yep.
She would always be referred to as Elizabeth Taylor, but it was almost as though her career was kind of in the past, and people were referring to her even at that time as somebody who was legendary, and her main performances in terms of acting were behind her. And now she was almost this other entity. She was a businesswoman. She was a pop culture figure. She was an activist. Yeah. Because let's go ahead and mention that. I'm not probably going to go into this very deeply in this episode, because you're right. It could be 3 episodes. It could be 4. There's a lot here, but I just want to go ahead and say up front that is a point we'll touch on briefly later, that she was very active in trying to deal with the AIDS epidemic and get research and you know.
Part of that was because of her friendship with Rock Hudson.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But I don't want to do a big biography on her, but I don't think we can understand Elizabeth Taylor's relationships if we don't talk a little bit about her life. So I am going to walk us through some of this a little bit.
The highlights.
The highlights, yes. So that when we get to her marriages, I think a lot of it will make more sense to us. Yes, definitely.
Was there 6
plural.
or 8?
8. Yes. Okay. So, early life. She was born Elizabeth Rosamond Taylor in Hampstead, London on February 27th, 1932.
Yeah, she's a February girl.
She is. To art dealer Frances Taylor and mom Sarah, a former stage actress. And they already had one child at the time, which would be Elizabeth's older brother, Howard. So they were Americans living in England because of Frances's work, and they were a well-off, socially prominent couple. In fact, Elizabeth said in an interview that she had an idyllic childhood when she was very young. One reason being that in addition to their London house, they also had a country home where she had a pony and chickens.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, and she was a person who always adored animals. She especially loved riding her horse and spending time outside, so being with those animals was a really important thing to her. But Elizabeth's mother wanted to make sure Elizabeth grew up to be a very refined young lady who was ready for society. So according to an A&E biography of Elizabeth Taylor, at a very, very young age, she started taking ballet lessons and was enrolled in deportment classes where they taught you how to behave and act as a young lady.
I could see that. She was very elegant. But she also had a rougher side, too.
Yeah. But the advent of war caused the family to have to leave England in 1939 and move back to America. This was when Elizabeth was around 7. And again, according to that same biography, it was actually while on the ship that Mom Sarah and Elizabeth saw their very first film together, and it was a Shirley Temple movie.
Aww.
And supposedly that is what inspired Sarah to pursue acting for her daughter, and also Elizabeth to want to be an actress. And of course, I mean, let's just go ahead and say this. Even when she was first born, Elizabeth always had that outstanding beauty.
Oh, she was so pretty.
Yes, I mean,
So
she
beautiful.
had those beautiful violet eyes, that dark hair. She just always gorgeous. And of course, you also had Sarah's background in acting, and the social standing didn't hurt. So this was something that Sarah went after full force.
Stage mommed it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So, sure enough, Elizabeth Taylor was soon given a 1-year contract with Universal Pictures, and she appeared in her first movie, the 1942 comedy There's One Born Every Minute, when she was 9 years old. She did well, but Universal still dropped her contract when the year ended. But fortunately for her, MGM noticed her potential, and they signed her on. And so she was in the movie Lassie Come Home in 1943, which she was really happy about, although she was paid significantly less than the dog actor who played Lassie.
That's crazy.
I know. But it was during the filming of this movie that she first met and starred alongside Roddy McDowall.
Oh, they were lifelong friends.
Yes. I mean, forever. One of her dearest friends. And then it was the following year that she very famously starred in National Velvet.
Yes, yes. Beautiful.
She played the character Velvet Brown, who... Have you seen the movie?
I feel like I have, but I think it was a long, long time ago. And didn't she have an accident on a horse, and this is what started her down the path of... Yeah, okay.
Yeah. The summary I saw is that basically she pretends to be a jockey because she wants to take her horse and compete
Mickey
in
Rooney
the,
was
in the
in it as
Grand
well.
National. Yes.
Yeah.
There is actually a story behind how she won the role. Her mom reportedly approached the MGM bosses to advocate Elizabeth should get this role because, she should
can
be
ride.
She can ride. She's perfect. This is who you need to choose. But supposedly the executives were concerned that she looked too young. Specifically, something was mentioned about her stature. She didn't look tall enough to be, to do this part. So according to Elizabeth herself, as recorded in the 2006 biography Elizabeth, quote, "In 3 months, I'd grown 3 inches. That single-mindedness, or stubbornness, if you will, is as much a part of me as the color of my eyes." And so I
She's
heard...
saying she willed herself to grow 3 inches?
I know, it hit me too. And so I actually heard a director of a new documentary that's just been released. It's called Elizabeth Taylor, The Lost Tapes. She was speaking about this same little incident.
Yeah.
And what she said was that Elizabeth was determined she was going to get this role. And so she went at it every day. She would do stretching exercises. She would eat protein. She just had like all of these different strategies she was using and willed herself to grow and got the role.
That's incredible.
But I think doesn't that show who she is?
that does.
That's the personality
Yep.
that she had.
It's not just mama that's stage momming.
Oh no. Oh no. If she wanted something, she went
got it.
after it. Yeah.
Which is also true later.
Yes, it is.
Very true
Yes,
later.
it is. So the movie was a smash hit and not only made her a star, but it also meant that MGM had no qualms about keeping their contract with her. On the negative side, you've already mentioned it was while she was filming this movie that she did injure her back when she fell off her horse, and that would end up causing her problems with her spine all
The
her
rest of
life.
her life.
And then, of course, some painkillers and different things
It
would
reminded me
follow.
of Matthew Perry, who had that injury on Fool's Rush In that started him down a path.
Yeah, absolutely. One other notable thing that Elizabeth took away from the movie was the racehorse. You said she gets what she wants. Well, that started really young. The racehorse was named King Charles, and it was actually a cousin to Seabiscuit.
No, cool.
I know. And so Elizabeth fell in love with this horse, of course, and it sounded as though the whole time she was filming, she kept saying,
I want this horse.
I want this horse. Give me this horse.
The one that she rode in National Velvet?
Yes.
Okay.
So Louis B. Mayer gave the horse to Elizabeth on her 13th birthday. And one source commented, quote, "It became the first of many gifts that the actor would ask for and
get."
receive
Yeah.
throughout her career."
Yes.
I was like,
Yes.
yes, girl,
Yes.
that is exactly who you are right
Yes,
there.
yes.
She was only 13. But anyway, the popularity led MGM to invest in Elizabeth. They started sending her to all the photo shoots and put her in the press junkets.
Because she's only getting prettier.
Exactly. And growing more mature. And so this led to more roles. And basically, it meant that Elizabeth's life was filled with schooling or film. And a lot of her schooling actually happened on the set with other
Yeah, that happens
aspiring
a lot.
young
Yeah.
actors. So she was that was her lifestyle.
Yeah.
She was living this life where everything was just dedicated to acting, and she was almost in a fishbowl. She was being watched constantly, being controlled constantly by everybody, her mother, the studio, all of it.
Yeah.
She said in her 1988 memoir, Elizabeth Takes Off, "I never could kick up my heels like other kids. There were too many restraints. My life was overscheduled and over-disciplined."
It's reminding me a little bit of Queen Victoria when she was growing up, how she was always being watched because she was the future queen. So
Right.
she couldn't even walk down the stairs by herself.
Right.
I mean, it's not that extreme, but it's giving me a little bit of that kind of
Well,
privileged, but also hyper vigilant, being watched all the time.
Yeah,
and regulated.
Like on the outside, it would look like this is such a wonderful life, but when you zoom in and look at it, there are so many things that you would really hate being confined to. You know, so that actually there were a few examples because this came up across multiple sources. They would talk about the fact that she lived such a small life in terms of the experiences that she was allowed to have. She didn't get to go to school proms or dances.
Yeah.
They even talked about it in one of the quotes. I think this was actually an actor on General Hospital, because remember, for a time later, Elizabeth acted on that. But he commented how she got such a kick one day of being taken to an arcade and playing a pinball game because she'd never done that. He said there were so many different little experiences
Yeah.
where she would be like, "I've never done this before."
But on the other hand, she's Elizabeth Taylor.
She's Elizabeth Taylor.
So
Yes.
you traded it off.
Yes. But to give just one little example of how controlling her mom could be, in the A&E biography, they shared the story of how Sarah would stand over to the side while Elizabeth was filming National Velvet, and she would be constantly making hand gestures to either guide her daughter in the
Yeah.
performance or giving her feedback, you know,
Yeah.
like louder or do this. This is what her life was like. And according to multiple sources, they made the inference that this is one of the reasons why Elizabeth was so eager to get married
To get
at
out of
a
the house.
very young age.
Makes
She was
sense.
tired of being controlled. She was rebelling. You know, she'd already started rebelling some. And so at the age of 18,
Is this the
she
Hilton?
was ready. Yes, it is.
All right. Okay.
Do you want to share anything that you know about this?
No, I'm just trying to remember. If I can only think of 6 of her husbands, so I was doing the in
Well,
my
remember,
head.
one is twice.
Yes, and that's who I was counting.
8 marriages, 7 husbands.
Well, then I'm missing one.
Okay.
So in my head, is it Nikki Hilton first? Mm-hmm. Nikki Hilton. Is Mike Todd second? Nikki Hilton, Mike Todd. Maybe there's a Wilding.
You're missing, yes.
Is Wilding next? Okay. Nikki Hilton, somebody Wilding, Mike Todd, Eddie Fisher, Richard Burton, some guy named Larry.
You missed one.
What's the other one?
John Warner. That
Oh, I
was
didn't
before
remember him.
Larry.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. You've just given him a nice
Well,
preview of
sorry.
what's coming.
I wanted to see if I could remember without looking it up.
Yeah. Well, you did a good job. So it actually worked out really well for MGM because the timing was so fortuitous. This marriage that she was having in real life was actually coinciding with her incredibly hyped movie, Father of the Bride.
Oh, I've always wanted to see that. That's one I have not seen because Spencer Tracy's in it.
Yeah,
I would love to see that.
Of course, I haven't seen that either, but I would enjoy that as well, I'm sure. But that timing was perfect. And this is actually one other point I haven't said yet. Something that was commented upon many times over was that Elizabeth did have a very strong maternal instinct. And so that actually, they think, was another reason why she was so eager to be married. But back to the point. Here she is. She's getting ready to come out in this movie. She's also getting ready to get married to Conrad Hilton Jr., who went by the nickname Nicky. And yes, he is of those Hiltons. In fact, not only was he the heir to the hotel fortune, he was the great uncle to people we recognize today,
Yeah.
Paris Hilton.
Yeah.
And
Her sister is Nikki as
yes,
well. Yeah.
also Nikki Hilton. Right. But according to Entertainment Weekly, the two met at the Macombo nightclub in Los Angeles the year prior to the marriage, and they hit it off. So when they were married on May 6th of 1950, Nikki was 23 and she was 18.
I thought she was 18. Yeah.
Yeah. They married at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills, and Elizabeth wore a very traditional and very elegant 1950 style pearl-encrusted white wedding gown. She had worked with the costume designer Helen Rose, who also designed Grace Kelly's wedding gown, to create the dress, and it was paid for by MGM because
Wow.
they were
Publicity.
trying. Yep, exactly. This was going to get them more hype, more mileage. Reportedly, it took 15 people 3 months to make that dress. This is according to Brides magazine, and it supposedly cost about $1,500 back in 1950, but it sold at a London auction for $187,931 in 2013.
Wow.
I know. The wedding itself, amazing. The marriage,
Terrible.
not so much. In fact, yeah, terrible is probably putting it mildly. They set off on a 14-week European
Very
honeymoon.
nice.
Yeah,
As you
poor
do.
things. It's a shame
As
they
you
couldn't
do.
stay longer. Yeah.
If only they could have seen more.
Yeah, exactly. But trouble followed immediately. According to a People magazine article, Elizabeth shared the details in the book Elizabeth Takes Off, saying that Nikki Hilton, quote, became sullen, angry, and abusive physically and mentally, and also, quote, the honeymoon and the relationship were both over by the time we returned.
Man.
Yeah, it was bad. According to the details I saw, he was really abusive. It was a terrible situation. So they divorced in January of 1951 after about 8 months of marriage. And just to kind of let you know, down the road, he would end up dying in 1969.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Obviously, this was a really
Rough start.
yeah, it was probably a very traumatic experience for Elizabeth. So when it came to husband number 2, she chose a very, very different type of man. And that man was Michael Wilding. So Michael was a British actor who was 20 years older than Elizabeth, and he was described using words like kind, charming, and debonair.
Well, that sounds good.
I
It's a
know.
good start.
Yeah. They met in England while making Ivanhoe, and they married on February 21st, 1952, when she was 20 and he was 40. It was also his second marriage, by the way. They stayed together for 5 years, during which
Okay.
time they had 2 sons, Michael Jr., who was born in 1953, and Christopher, who was born in 1955. And Elizabeth talked about him very well. She said he was a wonderful father, said lots of nice things. But even so, after 5 years of marriage, they did divorce. This is something that came out a little bit. You had to make some inferences.
Yeah.
But it sounded as though what happened, the problem really that did them in was that her star kept rising.
Oh,
and his
sort of a
was
Star is
not.
Born kind of thing.
Exactly. One of the movies that Elizabeth did during the time they were married was Giant.
With Rock and James Dean.
Rock Hudson and James Dean, who, by the way, was tragically killed in a car accident before the filming ended when he was only 24 years old. And Elizabeth was devastated
Yeah,
by that,
they
by
were
the way.
really, really good friends.
Very close. But regardless, the film was a smash hit, and she was already a big star.
Yeah.
But I mean, this just took her to new heights. And one of her friends just said it straight out in that A&E biography that I've mentioned several times, that he thought being in his wife's shadow all the time just became too much for Michael. He just couldn't do it. They had already separated, but Elizabeth was ready to move on because she actually married her next husband just a week or two after her divorce.
This is Mike, right?
From Michael, yes, from Michael Wilding was finalized. She filed for divorce in late November of 1956. It was not official until January of 1957, and she ended up marrying her new husband, Mike Todd, on February 2nd of 1957.
Now, she, I think, has called Mike Todd, like him and Richard Burton kind of vie for love of my life
Yes.
category. And I'm going to let you tell everybody what happened to him. But I wonder,
Had he
lived,
lived,
if they
what
would
would have happened?
Yeah.
I saw that too.
Yeah.
One note I'll make before we move off of Michael Wilding, though, is that they stayed friendly, and I think that was a theme. You know, we had a lot of breakups with
Yes, we
with
did.
Liz. Sometimes, Liz, Elizabeth. I'll probably use both of those names
She went by
interchangeably.
both.
She did. But years later, in his obituary in 1979, she described their breakup as being, quote, a friendly divorce, and the New York Times reported how upset she was when she learned he had died. So they had stayed friendly.
I think that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a theme. It was a theme throughout. But let's go on to Mike Todd. You are spot on. You are spot on. This man meant so much to her. Mike Todd was a very self-assured movie producer who was 25 years older than Elizabeth and reportedly was taken with her the moment he saw her. In fact,
Who wouldn't be? Look at her.
right. But he declared, I'm going to marry this girl. Like
Wow.
he was like taken with her. Now, just for context, one of his most famous movies was the smash hit around the world in 80 days.
He did Todd A.O. Vision, something like that. He invented some kind of new way to film Panavision. I'm going to get it wrong, so everybody, if you want to learn more about it, but he was really innovative, and you'll still see it in some of the movies. It says something about Todd. I can't remember the phrase, but he came up with a new, I don't know if it was coloring or the way they filmed it, but it was very important to the industry.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, he was so self-assured and smooth-talking that, according to Elizabeth herself in one of her books, she said in terms of their getting married that, quote, he didn't ask me, he told me.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were married in Acapulco, Mexico. I've already said the date, in February of 1957, when he was 49 and she was 24. This time, according to Brides magazine, Elizabeth chose to wear a very dramatic pastel blue hooded silk organza gown that could transition into an off-the-shoulder silhouette once you took the hood down. And she also sported her 29-carat diamond engagement ring.
What does that even look like?
I don't know.
I've never seen. That has to, like, is that as big as your head? What? I don't know.
You know what I need to do? I did not do this, but I need to go and find a picture just of her jewelry and include that in the show notes because, oh my goodness, the jewelry this woman had, insane. But back to the wedding. It was another Hollywood couple, their close friends, Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, who stood up with them as their best man and matron of honor.
Remember those names. The gong is going off in the background.
Ding, 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 ding.
Dong.
And as you've already mentioned, based on comments made by Elizabeth herself and multiple sources, Mike Todd was the first major love in her life. She wrote in her book, God, I loved him. My self-esteem, my image, everything soared under his exuberant, loving care. I'm going to briefly let you hear, this is just a small piece of an interview that she gave. He's sitting beside her, so he's listening in as she says this. I want to let you hear what she said about him just briefly.
Should I really answer? Well, I think he's the nicest person I've ever lived with. No, he's a wonderful man. He has everything that you could possibly want. He has a wonderful sense of humor. I don't want him to hear this because his head is big enough as it is.
Yes, it is.
And he's very generous, and he's very sympathetic. But I think the most wonderful thing of all is that he's a marvelous cook. So that saves me from the kitchen.
I really like that clip because not only does she say nice things about them, but I think it gives a window into what their life was like.
I looked at her body language and she was genuinely smiling. She was happy. She just looked like full of joy, and not just, I'm putting on a show for you, full of joy. Like, you can't fake that kind of body language. She just looked genuinely happy.
She did. She looked kind of radiant. But it is interesting. This is something that I came across and it hit me as I was doing my research, editorial comment for a moment. It almost made me wonder what Elizabeth's perception of a healthy marriage was like, because this was the first time I noticed this, but a common theme that came up after this particular marriage that I saw several times was how she would talk about enjoying spats, or talk like within a marriage there was kind of this recurring theme of
she liked the drama,
right? Like having little arguments, having spats. And so this is a different soundbite where Elizabeth and Mike are being asked by a reporter about their marriage, and you hear Elizabeth responding.
Frank, there's been a lot of publicity about your public spat. I even heard something about a champagne bottle incident. Please tell me.
That is the most filthy thing I've ever heard in my life. I usually don't get cross. But the person that wrote this story is a frustrated old biddy who takes her frustrations out on her typewriter, and to me it is such a sad commentary. And if anybody believes it, that's even sadder. I wish everybody could be as unhappy as we are. Then there'd be no wars, there'd be no problems. The world would be quite nice.
They had kind of artful, combustible fights, and they loved it. They were real good at it.
Well, we're not introverts. If we have something to say, I say, hey, Liz. She always, hey, Mike. And if they make a Dreyfus case out of that, then it's too bad.
And they would make up.
So the person who added the commentary was Shirley MacLaine, one of Elizabeth's close friends who was speaking in this interview as well. And she said they loved it.
They liked it.
This was a thing with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they couldn't have been any happier. So together they had a daughter, Elizabeth Frances Todd, who they called Liza. She arrived 6 months after the wedding, and they were reportedly so happy together, so devoted to each other. And Mike showered Elizabeth with extravagant gifts, jewelry in particular, but it was everything else too. It was paintings and furs, just anything that she wanted. And that was a theme with him. He was a very big spender. About 2 weeks after Elizabeth had started filming Cat on a Hot Tin Roof with Paul Newman, Mike asked Elizabeth to fly to New York with him. She was sick. This is something that she dealt with her whole life.
She was also sick a lot.
She was sick a lot, especially respiratory things, pneumonia. This was a recurring thing. So she did not feel well, and he was like, okay, stay back. And then Mike tried to convince Kirk Douglas to come with him. And Kirk's wife didn't feel right, didn't feel good about this trip, and convinced him to stay, which he was irritated about. He was angry about. But his wife's feelings turned out to be predictive. Yeah, sadly, very, very tragically right, because Mike Todd and the handful of other people who were on board the plane all passed away when it crashed on March 22nd, 1958. This is interesting. Numerous sources said the name of the plane was Lucky Liz, but they actually showed a close-up of the side of the plane in one of the documentaries, and it said the Liz. So that's one of those conflicting things. Regardless, here is her name on this plane, and she was just absolutely devastated. She reflected later saying, quote, "I honestly did not think I would survive, and I didn't much care if I did not." Shirley MacLaine shared that she rushed right over to Elizabeth's house when she heard the news, and that she found Elizabeth in bed, unable to believe what had happened, just disbelieving. Shirley described Elizabeth as destroyed. Yeah. And she couldn't even get out of bed. Yeah. And her marriage to Mike Todd would prove to be her only marriage that did not end in divorce. Yeah. But unfortunately, the tragic loss of this beloved husband would actually end up leading to the divorce of their close friends. Yes. Which takes us over to Eddie Fisher.
Eddie Fisher.
Yeah. Ugh. This is so sad. So you guys will recall Mike's best friend was popular singer Eddie Fisher. He was best man at Mike and Elizabeth's wedding, while matron of honor was Eddie Fisher's wife and the wonderful actress Debbie Reynolds. So at the time of Mike's passing, the Fisher couple, had 2 small children, one being
Carrie Fisher.
Carrie
who
Fisher.
You may know from Star Wars, a little indie feature.
Yes. And then also their son Todd, who at that time was barely a month old.
I wonder if they named him after Mike Todd.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, he was already a month old, though, but they were such close friends, he absolutely could have been named after Mike Todd. But Eddie and Debbie were among the many friends who showed up for Elizabeth. She had a lot of friends who knew that she was struggling really hard. They actually had to do a suicide watch with her for a while.
I do not doubt it.
Yeah. And so Eddie Fisher was one of the people who was there really supporting her. I'm assuming Debbie was probably back with 2 small children. Yeah. But he spent a lot of time there.
He really comforted her.
He really did.
He really did.
And they began to have a love affair, and Eddie Fisher ended
I don't know if it was love. You could have dropped that part.
Well, so he ended up leaving Debbie, and the 2 of them got married. He was her 4th husband on May 12th, 1959. Instead of a ring, Eddie gave her a 40-carat engagement bracelet.
40 carat? Can she even lift her hand at this point? Is her hand just too heavy?
I bet she's doing okay. I bet she's struggling
she's got
through it.
Some muscles just from lifting her hand. The 27-carat engagement ring from Mike. This is 40 carat. I don't even know. I mean,
this woman, I'm telling you. But just an interesting side note, Elizabeth Taylor had recently converted to Judaism, which some sources speculated was because of Mike Todd's influence. He was Jewish, and so they thought perhaps that, when she was with him, she decided to do that. But Eddie was also Jewish. Regardless, they were married in a synagogue in honor of their faith, and they did this in Las Vegas. According to Brides Magazine, this time Elizabeth wore a green silk A-line dress. Again, likes the hood. So we had a hood and translucent long sleeves. But the wedding joy did not last long, because Elizabeth Taylor later reflected, quote, "It was distressing to open the papers day after day and see captions under my photographs referring to me as a homewrecker."
Yeah, it was a big deal. This was a big deal. Debbie was America's sweetheart. You may know her from Singing in the Rain or any number of, you probably know her from her later career. I mean, she was
in those Tammy movies.
She was just huge. She had done a ton of films, and they saw her as this precious, this American perfect family, and this, I don't know, harlot came in and broke up this family, and that's the way she was portrayed.
She was, and it was even more difficult for Elizabeth because prior to this, she had the sympathy of the whole world. Like everyone was on her side.
And then she did this.
And then this happened, and she went overnight from being the sympathetic victim to, as you said, they were casting her as the harlot, the adulteress, the homewrecker, and she hated it. And she always maintained that Eddie and Debbie's marriage was in trouble before she ever came along. That was her side of it.
Which is probably true, because it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't have been.
Right. And to be fair, Debbie Reynolds said to People magazine back in 1983, quote, "A man doesn't leave a woman for another woman unless he wants to go.
Right.
You know, when Mike Todd died, I sent Eddie to help Elizabeth. I don't think she ever really loved Eddie. He was an interim interest during her mourning period."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they made up later, the two of them, the Debbie and Elizabeth.
They did.
Made up.
And yes, they did. So one last little note. In spite of her mourning, Elizabeth was able, she forced herself to go finish filming of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. She said she did it because she knew Mike would have wanted her to. But one of the biographers pointed out that she likely also needed the money because Mike Todd was such a huge spender. He did not have savings. So she went and finished that film, which was another thing that people were applauding until all this happened with Eddie, right? In hindsight, everybody pretty much thinks that Debbie was right, that Eddie was just kind of this interim interest during her mourning period, because as soon as Elizabeth came across a certain actor on the set of Cleopatra.
Bye-bye, Eddie.
Bye-bye, Eddie. So let's just go ahead and stop there, take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a fella you might recognize by the name of Richard Burton.
Yes. There's not much we love more than spilling the tea with you every Tuesday, so we've decided to occasionally take a moment to thank a few of our supporters who help make this possible.
Along with the fun, producing a weekly podcast also brings with it more time and expense than you might expect. Your financial generosity in becoming a member through Buy Me a Coffee, a very simple link found on our website, allows us to keep creating these episodes.
We'd like to extend our deepest gratitude to one of our current members, Laura A. As a thank you, Laura and anyone else who becomes a Scandal Water supporter will receive perks like discounts on merch and access to exclusive bonus content, such as our mini-sodes.
If you'd like to hear your name on that roster, visit us at www.scandalwaterpodcast.com.
Until then, we lift our cup to you, Laura.
Cheers! And we are back.
So during the break, I looked up what the Todd AO was, and it is still in use today.
Wow.
Pretty well. So here's what, I'm reading this straight from Wikipedia, but I recommend you guys do kind of if you're kind of nerdy like I am about the origins of film and what is used, do a deep dive into this. So just reading from Wikipedia, it says Todd AO is an American post-production company founded in 1953 by Mike Todd and Robert Naffy, I'm not sure if that's right, Naify, providing sound-related services to the motion picture and television industries. I didn't remember it was sound. For more than 5 decades, it was the worldwide leader in theater sound. The company retains one facility in the Los Angeles area, so that's today. The other thing I remembered is developing and distributing a large film format presentation system which incorporated a wide curved screen with multi-channel sound. I remembered the wide curved screen. So it's got a timeline of stuff, and something you guys might be interested in is that in 1995, Todd AO acquired Skywalker Sound, South Studios from George Lucas in Santa Monica.
Wow.
So there's more about it, but when you look down on the Wikipedia page under awards, in the year 2013, in the BAFTAs, it was nominated for Best Sound for Django Unchained.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I mean. It doesn't look like there was anything past 2013, so maybe it's not used through today, but at least 2013, there was still stuff going on.
This was a very accomplished man.
Yeah, it was. So anyway, look at all the, I'm just scrolling the awards, showing Candy, and it's never ending.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So something interesting to look into.
Yeah, very interesting. I didn't know that at all. Well, to talk about Elizabeth and her relationship with Richard Burton, I think you just can't do this justice without talking a little bit about the movie Cleopatra. And I'm going to tell you, this was fascinating. I did not know this backstory.
It needs its own episode.
It really
needs its own episode.
It's crazy.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
cracy. But here's a fun little clip from Elizabeth herself telling you how she ended up taking the role.
Well, I was in the bathtub. Eddie answered the phone, and I was getting so sick of it. I really didn't want to do it. The first script was terrible. And I said, yeah, tell him I'll do it for $1 million and 10% of the absolute gross, which was absurd, and I meant it to be absurd. And Eddie came back and said through the door, he said, okay, it's a deal.
It's a
I
nuts.
just screamed and dove under the water, inhaling more water because I was laughing so hard.
She just threw a price tag on there and said, I don't want to do this. Give me $1 million. And they said, okay.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
And she was the first actor to break that $1 million barrier to get that for
Just
a film.
because she asked for it.
Just because she
gets
asked for
what
it.
she wants.
And she got the extra money too because
Yeah.
she asked for
10% of the gross.
Right. She made a fortune off this movie that's,
Didn't do very well.
Right. I mean, I love the laugh too.
I
As
know.
she's telling it, she's
She's
so proud
cackling.
of herself. It is so funny. But anyway, so she signs on to do Cleopatra because of this situation. And they started filming this in London, which she talks about. She was like, how ridiculous that they chose London. She said the weather was so cold and so wet while they're trying to represent this setting that is nothing like this. And they faced one production problem after another. And then on top of that, the weather contributing to this, of course, Elizabeth fell very ill.
Yeah, yeah. Then they blame her. They blamed her for delays because she was sick.
Yes, this was the part that I knew nothing about. Totally shocking to me. For years, she had dealt with those issues with her back. We've already talked about that. But she also had these bronchial issues. She grew so ill with what most sources referred to as pneumonia. I'm assuming that's what it was. That she lost her energy. She would have to be carried onto and off of the set a lot of days. And then she actually collapsed in her hotel in March of 1961 and was rushed to the hospital where she lingered near death for several days. In fact, she will tell it that she was declared dead a couple of times.
Dude.
And they had to do a tracheotomy on her.
Oh, yeah. I remember a tracheotomy. Yes, yes, yes.
And she was very proud of that later because, that was kind of a badge of,
Battle
honor.
wound.
Yes. She was so sick. And yes, everything had to be halted. When she finally got back to America, she was brought off the plane in a wheelchair. She was given time to recover. And meanwhile, the execs were basically redoing,
out.
well, they were, but they were also redoing everything related to Cleopatra. They were overhauling the plan. So several months later, when she is finally able to return, they are now filming in Rome.
Better.
Where they hope
More
that this
temperate,
where this climate will be friendlier to her health and also more believable as a setting for the film, right? And they'd also changed a bunch of the people involved in the production. The director was different and several actors were different.
How could you already start filming and then be like, never mind?
I think they had to start over. That's what I'm inferring is they
okay.
started over.
Okay.
Some of the new actors they brought on board included Rex Harrison,
Yeah.
Roddy McDowell, and Richard
Oh,
Burton.
okay. See, my thinking was that maybe it was because of Rex and Richard that they were filming in London in the first place.
Nope,
but no.
he wasn't even part of it. Mark Antony had been replaced. New
Interesting.
actor. So Richard was married to an actress named Sybil Williams at the time, although he had a very, very big reputation for drinking and womanizing. So it was such a big reputation for that, in fact, that reportedly when Liz first started working with him, she spoke of this herself. She said she wasn't going to become another notch on his belt. And there is an excerpt from Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon, that I found very interesting. This was actually an authorized biography about the star, by the way. I'm going to ask you to read this little excerpt.
But her feelings changed on January 22nd, 1962, when they filmed their first scene together. Elizabeth starred as Cleopatra, the woman who had conquered empires, and Richard played Mark Antony, the powerful Roman general who became Cleopatra's lover. Richard, then 36, had gone on a bender the night before, drinking everything he could get his hands on. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and he had not slept for 2 nights. He got a cup of coffee, but he could not bring the cup to his lips because his hands were shaking so badly. He asked Elizabeth for help. "Hold this, love. Would you hold it to my mouth?" She held the cup up to his mouth and started to giggle. "He was such a slob," she said later. "He was such a mess, and I looked into those green eyes that were twinkling and smiling at me, and he drank the whole mug, and we kept staring at each other." She remembered being so close to him, seeing the grog blossoms, the burst blood vessels on the face of a heavy drinker, and strangely falling for him in that moment. He was not the arrogant stage actor she had imagined. Instead, he was achingly vulnerable. The feeling was mutual. "I fell in love at once," Richard said later. "She was like a mirage of beauty of the ages, irresistible like the pull of gravity." The problem was that both of them were married. Elizabeth to singer Eddie Fisher, and Richard to the actress Sybil Burton. with whom he shared 2 daughters. Fisher stopped coming to set when Richard and Elizabeth had a scene together. Their flirtation was too obvious and too humiliating. Sybil believed that her husband's affair with Elizabeth would be no different than all the others.
Poor Sybil.
Poor Sybil.
Poor Eddie, too. But I mean, he, he kind of, I thought that was interesting. She was determined not to be a notch in his belt, and then just got drawn right into
the drama and the excitement
and the vulnerability. So I don't know that we've brought this up before. That's something else I saw time and time again. People would talk about the fact that I think in some ways she was so much larger than life that she actually loved it when people would talk to her like a normal person, even insult her or be willing to say things that were a little hard for her to hear. It was like she loved body jokes. She was very earthy in some ways, and so I think that was another element that Richard Burton had that really
he's very earthy.
So these two, like they could not have been
It was electric.
More open
Boogie,
about
woogie,
their
woogie.
affair too.
Yes.
Boogie woogie. They weren't hiding it. They were spotted in and out of nightclubs and restaurants. They were chased around by the paparazzi in Rome. This is all in 1962, right?
This is scandalous.
I
mean, she started the scandal with Eddie, and this just escalated.
Oh.
I think, wasn't even the Pope, denouncing her?
Yes. As a matter of fact, that's what comes next. These headlines are about their affair are going around the world, and it prompted the Vatican, the Pope, to denounce their behavior, calling it erotic vagrancy. And the Pope even recommended that Elizabeth's children be taken away from her.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Yeah. They were not going to be quelled.
No.
Nothing stopped them.
No.
And they were unabashed by all of this. They ended their respective marriages, although something I saw was that this really bothered Richard. He had a lot of guilt about leaving Sybil. He didn't apparently have any problems with cheating on her, but
just leaving her.
But leaving her bothered him, and he had a lot of guilt about that. But they did both leave their marriages, and they married in Montreal on March 15th, 1964, 9 days after Liz's divorce from Eddie was finalized. Cleopatra's costume designer, Irene Shroff, designed a marigold-hued chiffon baby doll dress for Liz to wear at the wedding. And she had this lovely little updo that had all kinds of flowers woven into the braids. And she had her diamond and emerald Bulgari brooch, which Richard later followed up with by giving her a 69-carat
It just gets
Cartier
bigger.
ring.
They get bigger and bigger.
They do. I think they're probably competing against each other. Oh, okay. He gave you that.
24,
Well.
49, 69, 100 carats, 1,000,000 carats. Oh my gosh.
It's crazy. Yeah. Well, Elizabeth had already started the adoption process for a young German girl named Maria. And once they were married, Richard also adopted her as well as Elizabeth's daughter, Liza. And this couple traveled the world spending their money, buying everything that they could get their hands on. And they were so flamboyant. They were fighting publicly. They were just
loving
the
life.
paparazzi's dream.
Yes.
I mean, yes.
Brangelina who?
I know. And that's the thing. This is before all, nowadays some of this is so common.
Yeah.
These guys were
starting
it.
Yeah.
They were starting it. That was a comment that was made was most other couples or individuals who were in Hollywood at that time, you were kept under control by the studio. If you started misbehaving, they got you in line or they dumped you. Your contract was over. And so you got on board. Nothing was stopping these two. They were not bothered by any of this. I even saw a clip where Elizabeth said that she thought, quote, having a fight, a ridiculous and out outrageous, ridiculous fight is one of the greatest exercises in marital togetherness. So
not for me, sister.
I know.
No.
So they were just going at it, right? They also, of course, starred in a lot of movies together, including The Sandpiper and the very, very famous Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Yeah. And I mean, Elizabeth, that she's very proud of that role. A lot of people say that it mimicked their actual relationship. She was playing a woman a lot older than she actually was at the time. She gained 20 pounds. She wore prosthetics and padding. She went with it. And she said in one of the interviews, this was her favorite role. She was so proud of it. But the other problem that was happening was their bickering was intensifying. And a lot of that was because they were both drinking very heavily. There was also jealousy, and there were some issues with other addictions or substance abuse because Elizabeth was taking painkillers in different formats. And so...
And painkillers and drinking is not a good idea.
Yeah. And then Liz had a few movies that flopped. And that added to the tension. You know, their fighting increased. It just turned into this really, really tense, awful situation. I mean, by this point, they were given the nickname the Battling Burtons.
Wow.
Yeah. In the book, Elizabeth Taylor, The Grit and Glamour of an Icon, which I've already referenced, the author commented, quote, "So many of Richard's letters to Elizabeth include apologies for whatever alcohol-fueled fight had taken place the night before. I shall be good today and surprise you," he wrote on October 9th, 1972. "Thank you for taking care of me yesterday." And then the author added the editorial comment that it was a love too all-consuming to last.
Yes. It's too much. It's too much.
And it was, because after nearly a decade together, which was Liz's longest marriage, actually, they divorced in June of 1974. But then guess who she married next?
Richard Burton.
Richard Burton. A little over a year later, they remarried on October 10th, 1975 in Botswana. This time, Liz wore a dress very in keeping with the styles of the 1970s. And by the way, that dress would later sell at London auction, the year 2011 to be exact, for $62,500. First marriage lasted almost a decade. The second one, less than a year.
Gosh.
They divorced on July 29th, 1976. Elizabeth is reported to have said, "I love Richard with every fiber of my soul, but we can't be together."
Yeah.
And then later in life, she said, "Even though there were rough times, I wouldn't give up 1 minute of my time with Richard Burton." So there's the conflict right there. I mean, we can't live together.
But we can't live without each other.
Right. And because of their children and their careers, their paths continued to cross. I mean, they couldn't separate totally, and they didn't want to, apparently, because in 1983, they appeared on Broadway together in Noel Coward's Private Lives, which is a play about a divorced couple who can't live without each other.
Oh.
So Richard Burton, sadly, died unexpectedly when he was only 58 years old.
Wow, I didn't remember he was that young.
1984. Elizabeth, this was, I think, a very respectful thing. She said that she chose not to go to the funeral because she didn't want to upstage the event.
Yeah.
But she did visit his grave a few days later with only her bodyguards. She went very early in the morning to say her goodbyes. And she told the authors of a book, Furious Love, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton, and the Marriage of the Century, that in my heart, I will always believe we would have been married a third and final time. And she would not let them have it, but she read aloud Richard Burton's final letter to her before his death, which was in 1984. She read it aloud to a Vanity Fair reporter, and in his letter, Richard Burton had written that he was happiest when they were together and wondered about having another chance.
Oh, that's so sad.
It is very
Gosh,
sad.
that's sad. And he's married to somebody else at the time, because you referred in the top of the episode to his wife that's waiting backstage.
Yes, but I believe there were actually 2 wives after Elizabeth. Don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure. So he also could have been in between.
Could have, okay.
I have no idea, honestly. So Elizabeth's marriage number 7 was to John Warner. He was a politician that she met on a blind date to a bicentennial dinner with Queen Elizabeth II at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. How about that for a change?
As you do. Gosh.
This is just like last week.
Out of my I couldn't even imagine. This is not my life.
Even
Not my
reading
life.
that sentence,
Yeah.
I had to be like, what?
What?
Wait. Okay, John drove his own car to pick Liz up at her hotel, and the evening went well. One of the things that Liz reportedly really enjoyed was the fact that John owned a horse farm. He joked later, "I think she fell in love with the farm, and I guess I came along with the horses." They got engaged in September 1976, and they married that December on John's farm in Virginia. According to Brides Magazine, this time Liz wore a violet cashmere dress topped with a tweed and fur coat and matching turban.
Okay, she's gone to turbans now. We went from hoods to turbans.
So John was a former Secretary of the Navy who aspired to be elected to the Senate, and being married to Elizabeth Taylor doesn't hurt with that.
Doesn't hurt at all.
Doesn't hurt. So he was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1979, which unfortunately did not turn out to be the best thing for the marriage. Elizabeth Taylor said, "He knows he wasn't the love of my life, and I know I wasn't the love of his life. but we loved each other. We got along wonderfully until he decided to be a politician, and then he married the Senate. So she ultimately divorced John Warner in 1982, who did not retire from the Senate, by the way, until 2009. And again, like some of her other marriages, they remained friendly after they divorced and even after she married again. Now, little side note, between this marriage with John Warner and Liz's 8th and final marriage was a gap of about 9 years, which was the longest period in her life so far.
I was thinking, if you said that she was divorced in 82, that means when Richard passed in 84, she was single at the time.
Yeah. And it was during this time frame when she was not married, actually, that Liz became really involved in some of her most well-known activist work, which we've already referenced. It started when, you've already said this, her dear friend and her giant co-star Rock Hudson died of AIDS in 1985. She gained secret admittance to visit him in the hospital when he was dying. She went in a back door and snuck in, and they said that she asked about hugging him, and it wasn't because she was concerned about herself. She didn't want to expose him to anything.
Oh, yeah, because the immune system is so low.
Yes. And so as she, she saw his situation, and then she met other people. This AIDS was such an epidemic.
Right.
And she was appalled, first of all, at the numbers, how many people were dying of it, and then what their lives were like.
Yeah.
They were so isolated. People were afraid to be around them, to touch them. Her heart was just broken by it, she said. In a People magazine article, it said, quote, Taylor was the first well-known celebrity to become involved with raising awareness about the disease and rallying others to take action. She organized and hosted Commitment to Life, the first AIDS fundraiser in 1985, and went on to co-found AMFAR, one of the first national charities for AIDS research. In 1991, she created the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation with a focus on caring for people living with HIV. And Elizabeth Taylor told People magazine, I want to do all I can because I have to live with me. In 2001, President Bill Clinton awarded her the second highest civilian honor in the nation, the Presidential Citizens Medal, in recognition of her commitment to AIDS activism. So just a little side note about that. And that brings us to our final husband.
Larry.
You said that with a tone, Ashley.
I just mean he's so not her type. I had nothing against Larry.
No, he was not her type.
No.
She met him in the Betty Ford Clinic. He came from a very, very different background than her own. He was a construction worker who had dropped out of high school, and he was 20 years younger than Liz. He was there because he had issues with alcohol, while Liz was struggling with both alcohol and prescription pills. She admitted at some point that she went into rehab because her children, her brother, and a few very close friends basically did an intervention with her. That she phrased it, they forced her to face facts. Larry would say later, I know who she was, of course, but I can't tell you I remember watching any of her films. She was funny and sweet, and the more I got to know her, the sweeter she became. They married October 6th, 1991, in an elaborate ceremony held, do you remember where?
No, I don't. Where?
Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch.
Oh, yeah.
With a whole bunch of famous people there watching, including Liza Minnelli, Eddie Murphy, Nancy Reagan, Arsenio Hall, George Hamilton, Merv Griffin, Macaulay Culkin, and Brooke Shields.
What year was it?
1991.
Macaulay Culkin was like 11.
Well,
He's
he was friends with...
It would have been the year after Home Alone, or around Home Alone time.
Oh, you were good with your dates.
He's the same age as me.
Oh,
so
okay.
and that I remember.
You remember.
That's just one of them weird things I remember.
So this wedding caused one of the biggest media frenzies in Hollywood history up to that time. Of course, things have changed since then. But about a dozen helicopters hovered overhead trying to get photos, although the wedding...
It's like royalty marrying a commoner. They're just like, what?
Well, you know what? In a way, it probably was like that, right? But back to what I was saying. Although the wedding was guarded by a 100-man security team, one member of the paparazzi even parachuted down and landed about 20 feet from the wedding party. Craziness.
Yes.
Craziness. Well, anyway, they were happy together for a while. In fact, Larry shared a story that I thought showed a little bit of Elizabeth's personality. He said that they were visiting Switzerland back in 1992. He said, quote, we were in bed and she sat up and said, I want to make a snow angel. She grabbed a fur coat and put it over her nightdress. That's how I remember Elizabeth. She had a childishness about her. She was 20 years older than me, but I never felt she was old. But it didn't take long before the problem started. Reportedly, for Larry, it was it was being married to
Yeah.
this superstar.
Yes.
He said, those cameras everywhere. Elizabeth was used to it. I never got used to it. While Elizabeth commented at one point, he stopped working. You can't have love without respect.
Yeah.
So they also stayed friends after their divorce in October of 1996. They spoke regularly to each other, after their divorce. After she passed, Larry said, I have wonderful memories of my time with Elizabeth, and I will treasure her memory forever. I love her. I always will, and I know she loved me too. But after their divorce, Elizabeth Taylor vowed she would never marry again, and she never did. So we've mentioned that Liz suffered from so many different illnesses over her lifetime. Well, she had other things that occurred to her. She had to have hip replacements. She survived a surgery for a benign brain tumor in 1997.
I remember that.
She continued to have those bouts of pneumonias. And then she finally passed at the age of 79
That's
on
still so
March
young to me.
23rd of 2011.
That's so young to me. I mean, to think she lived. I mean, she just lived.
She did. What a big life that
Yes.
lady had.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Armchair psychologist.
So I think that brings us to our armchair. And this has been such a big episode. I mean, there's so much we could talk about, but I thought I would just get us started by throwing out a little quote from Elizabeth Taylor herself. This is something that she said to Life magazine back in 1992, and then let you respond.
Okay.
Okay. She said, I've been lucky all my life. Everything was handed to me. Looks, fame, wealth, honors, love. But I've paid for that luck with disasters, terrible illnesses, destructive addictions, broken marriages.
Wow. That's actually really profound.
It is.
It's very profound because she's calling herself lucky, but looking back on her life, you would go, would you call this lucky? It's like she has the clarity to see the full picture, to know, I am Elizabeth Taylor. I had all of this amazing stuff happen, but on the other hand, I'm Elizabeth Taylor, and I had all of this horrible stuff happen to me too. She's so complex and interesting, and I don't know that we're going to have anybody like her ever again.
She's definitely one of a kind.
She really is, and I think she
Yes.
would love that.
I think so too. I think there would be nothing that would make her happier
Than to know she is the one
Yes.
and only Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah.
What do
She-
you think?
Well, I think you actually said that very well. I agree with you. This is an insightful comment for her to be able to label both parts of herself, the fortunate, talented, pampered, privileged,
Spoiled.
privileged woman who had so much given to her, but then to recognize that a lot of that came with
A cost.
It came at a cost, which is a theme I think that we have talked about so many different times.
Yeah. So in terms of our theme of breaking up is hard to do, for Elizabeth, it wasn't that hard to do. She's like, doesn't work for me, bye. But jokes aside, I think this was a really great way to start our season.
Yes.
With one of the, if not the greatest, what do you even call her? She's more than an actress. She's an actress, an activist, a personality, an enigma.
She's
just
a whole persona.
She's just Elizabeth.
Yes. She is just Elizabeth.
Yes.
Yeah. So you know what? Let's just stop right there.
Let's do it.
And let's do a big shout out to...
Big cheers to you, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Cheers to you. If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown.
That's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music. Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.